CityWorks Expo is a collaborative, co-creative, and multidisciplinary idea exchange and festival conference that happens each fall in Roanoke, Virginia. By day, attendees are immersed in thought-provoking presentations, riveting performances, and engaging dialogue. By night, the conference continues with after-hours networking opportunities during street festivals, parties, and musical events. To learn more about Expo, visit cityworksexpo.com. Expo 2014 was made possible by these fine sponsors.
It's really great to be back here. I came 2 years ago when Ed and I and Ramiro, who's going to speak later, were Loeb Fellows at Harvard. And Ed asked me to come to Roanoke to speak at the Expo. I was very, very nervous because it was my first proper presentation in front of a US audience. And I know how, what a great tradition of speakers you have. So I talked then, do you know what? I'm going to move this, kind of. Because I have 30 minutes and I'm really rubbish at timekeeping, so I'm quite likely to talk forever unless I can see that little device there. Oh, look, 29:56. Here we go. And what I talked about 2 years ago was the work of my company Artichoke and its signature event, the event that we started with in London, where we worked out that what we wanted to do was present the work of this amazing French company, Royal de Luxe, with a show called The Sultan's Elephant. And that show was monumental in scale, spectacular in nature, and involved closing central London for 4 days, a world city that, it operates by everything working on time, the shops opening, the traffic running, the subways working. And we managed, after 5 years of conversation, to persuade the public authorities that what they most wanted to do was shut the streets and allow this sort of fairy tale of a French theatre show to play out in the streets. And we persuaded them that there would be an extraordinary response on the basis of nothing. I had no knowledge that this moment would work, but there was a weird trust between them and us, which was established after this very, very long conversation. And we did the show, and 1 million people came out to see. And the city discovered in a strange way that that toil, trade, and traffic weren't the only things that mattered in the life of an urban environment, that there were other values, there were other reasons why a city exists. And that was all to do with the invitation to its citizens to come out on the streets and enjoy those public spaces together. When I was here, somebody came up to me afterwards and said, don't you get bored with talking about it? Because it's all anyone ever talked about, this amazing show that stopped the streets of London. And I had to admit that never bored, but I think there are other things to talk about. So in this presentation, you won't see a single image of the Sultan's Elephant, but you can go and look at it online. And I think it was that probably made Michelle cry. So if you have a hanky standing by, that's the one to watch. So 2 years ago, I was here talking about myself and the company as arts producers, people who worked with the extraordinary imaginations of artists to put on their work. But that year in Harvard and extraordinary exposure to American thinking that I hadn't really come across before, the whole idea of what the academics love to call ephemeral urbanism. You're so good at titles, I can't even believe it. I thought I was just doing shows in open spaces, but apparently I'm indulging in ephemeral urbanism. That made me start thinking about not what we did, but the meaning and impact of what we did and what we continue to do. And although Artichoke is absolutely an arts-producing company, and artists are always central to the work that we do, I now see the impetus for what we do slightly differently. So what you're looking at, if you're looking at these images that are scrolling behind me, is an event that we do every 2 years in a very tiny city, smaller than this, in the north of England. It's a city which is beautiful, medieval, historic, significant, but sits in England's poorest county, where all the traditional industries of shipbuilding, steel, coal mining have disappeared. It has the highest unemployment rate of any city, of any county in England. It has rising unemployment. It has very high levels of obesity, high levels of illiteracy. It's an extraordinary thing. Were you to see the city, however, you would think that it was beautiful, as lovely Ed and Catherine came to Durham when I was putting on this event. So in the event, we take all the public spaces of that beautiful place and we invade them with the imagination of artists. We offer the artists an extraordinary platform. What you're seeing in this picture here is the very controversial statue that sits in the middle of the marketplace. Hated by some. He was a despotic mine owner in the early 1800s. And we decided that the only way to deal with this tension that arose around the refurbishment of the market square and the polishing of this statue was to sort of turn him into a bit of a joke. So we made that statue the centerpiece of a giant snow globe, a snow shaker that you might buy if you went to some tourist attraction, but massive, taller than this room. And the city was able to laugh at itself at 6 o'clock every evening. Bang, we switched it on, snow appeared, the thing lit up, big neons lit up saying, "I love Durham" on the outside of the thing. And people were able to look at that space in a completely different way. And then that was when I began to realize what it is that we do, because we don't only work with artists to provide a platform for what they want to do. What we do is we work with them on their ideas that allow them to investigate or to challenge or to make different the history, the contemporary history, the social fabric of the place that we're working. And their work is an interpretation of a site, a very familiar place to most of the people who visit it. But what we're aiming for is a way of unlocking the tensions and prejudices or the inherited feelings about what a place ought to be, who ought to be allowed to be there, to whom it belongs, how we can get people to share the space. This piece that you're looking at here, this is a neon by a French collective called Claire Fontaine, and it just sits there. But it sits on a building which, if you look closely, beneath the neon words, you can see Durham Miners Institute, 1875. That building is derelict. It was built by the Miners' Union in order to have a formal place of strength from which they could negotiate with the mine owners. There are no miners in Durham. There were 167,000 in 1979. The building is a nightclub temporarily. It's got a for sale sign outside. And the symbolism of the artist's work, Capitalism Kills Love, against the history of that building, and the fact that nobody really notices the building anymore because it's of the past, it's falling apart, it's got plants growing out of the roof. It's in one of the main streets on the way to the bus station, but it has no purpose, except perhaps to remind people of where they've come from, of what their history is and how that history informs where they are today. So Artichoke's work is or has a sort of social and political purpose. And that is very easily summarized. It is about this temporary transformation of the public realm, which you might think is a kind of massive extravagance and in these economically straitened times, a bit of an indulgence. But I would absolutely contend that that temporary transformation leaves its lasting legacies because it lives forever in the minds of people who see it. The Sultan's Elephant was a 4-day extravaganza which brought London to a standstill. But it changed cultural policy in the UK in terms of attitudes to work taking place in open-air spaces. It also changed the minds of people who experienced it. And it created a moment that lives in the memory forever. And that's the power of these temporary and ephemeral works, that they, I don't know, if you were ever in the school play when you were little, you had your daily life, you went to school, you did your classes, but there are moments when you are extracted from that, where the world is different, full of optimism and hope and adventure and excitement, and you feel differently, and you remember forever standing on the stage, and you remember the camaraderie of the people with whom you put that thing together. And this is the nature of the work that we do, that for our audiences, who in general aren't people who go to the theatre or to galleries or to opera houses, but they're people who live in this extraordinary place, what we want to do is bring them together in this temporary transformation of a very familiar landscape, so that they feel differently both about the place but also about the people that they share it with. There are no territorial boundaries to our work. It's always free to the public, costs a fortune, I have to raise all the money. But there are no reasons why people can't enjoy it, and can't enjoy it standing next to somebody that they perhaps would never have any contact with. So this social and political purpose, although unspoken, is absolutely at the foundation of what we do, and took us last year to a city whose schizophrenic nature is represented in its name, which is the extraordinary city of Derry, Londonderry, with a wiggly hyphen in between, because you couldn't have a straight hyphen, because that might mean that one came before the other. So any of you who know anything about that place will know that it sits on the north coast of Northern Ireland, part of what is still just about the United Kingdom, although there are many people in Northern Ireland who would not wish their city and their territory to be described as such. And Derry, Londonderry is a contested city. The history of Northern Ireland is one that is fraught with conflict, has been for 450 years. And in the last, for 30 years of my childhood, growing up, there was what was called, euphemistically called the Troubles, which was a war between the British state and those who wished that area to be reunited with the south of the country. It was ferociously fought, 3,000 people murdered, unsolved deaths. And we were asked to create a Lumiere, this project that you're seeing here, in the city in a way that would finish the city's year as a UK City of Culture, but would be a moment when we could bring the community together. So you have to understand the physical geography of the place. There's a walled city, and outside the walls, on one side of the river, live the majority Catholic Republican population, and on the other side of the river live the Protestant Unionist population. And there are a few places where it's mixed, but only a few. And only in 2011 was a pedestrian bridge built between the two communities. And that bridge may physically have been built, but there's very little that's been built in terms of unity or bringing people together. So we set out to create an extraordinary festival that would happen after dark in a place where people in general lock their doors. This is the city itself. And you're standing on the water side, the Unionist side, looking at the Republican side, if you like. And we set out to create a work that would bring people together across these divides, walking about in the city, territorially free, no impediment to enjoying this extraordinary illuminated transformation of their city. There's a tradition in Northern Ireland of bonfire burning, which is not pretty, maybe. It's seen by some as a celebration of their heritage. The kids in the community build bonfires, which can be 70, 80 feet high, structures that takes them all summer to build, and then they're filled with effigies of people that they hate from the other side, and then they're burnt. And And we decided to tackle this issue because fire in Northern Ireland is seen as a weapon. So what you just saw was part of an enormous 10-acre fire garden that we created. It took a lot of negotiation with the authorities who were anxious about what the meaning and the symbolism of this might provoke. The anxiety being that people would react badly. People would feel that they were, that this thing that has always been a hostile weapon would be used in some way by one side against the other. But in truth, 180,000 people wandered through those grounds saying, I can't believe what I'm seeing here. This is the most extraordinary thing. Crossing this bridge, which has recently been built, which is called the Peace Bridge, I was standing behind a grandmother and her grandchildren and her daughter and heard her say, I'm just so glad that your childhood is so different from ours. And what you felt was this community coming together in a way. I mean, it's a tiny moment. I don't pretend that we've in any way solved the Northern Irish problem, but it's a tiny moment where people felt that they could share the physical space and share the moment, and there was no tribal anxiety. This piece was on the old army barracks, and we created an enormous production where the children of the 8 primary schools in the city, who education in Northern Ireland is segregated. You go to a Catholic school, you go to a Protestant school. And in this piece, we got the kids to work together. Although, I have to say, failure on our part, we were unable to persuade them all to be in the same room together at the same time, even in this 21st century. So we played a game of Skype consequences, where the kids from one school would write a sentence and pass it via Skype to the next school. So they were kind of together, but not really together, until the very end, until the production, where we projected their work on the front of this barracks, which dominates the skyline and had been the headquarters of the British Army used to control that population. It was an enormously successful event, and we feel a real desire to go back there and continue this work. So I thought I'd talk to you about what we're doing next rather than things that we've done in the past. So working on this idea that we can change the way people feel about each other, we are going to go back to Derry in March this year, and we're going to tackle again the question of the bonfires. These are some headlines that have been recently in the papers about bonfires in Northern Ireland. As you can see, as you read them, it's not the nicest atmosphere that surrounds this tradition. But you here in the States, you have a different tradition of bonfire burning. And any of you who've been or know about the Burning Man Festival in the Nevada desert will know that there is a way that bonfires and fire and peace and love and reconciliation and memories can be created in a different way. So we've invited David Best, the well-known designer of the Burning Man temples, some of which you're seeing here, to come with us to Northern Ireland, to Derry, to this city that we love. And what we've done is we've found a site which is high up on a hill. The city itself is dominated by 2 cathedrals, Catholic and Protestant. And weirdly, because of course there is a God, if you cross the river and you climb the hill, there is a site which is in direct line with these 2 other cathedrals. And how strange is this? It sits in one of the few mixed areas in Derry, with a Catholic population on one side and a Protestant housing project on the other. And the plan is, and it's not a straightforward project, as I'm sure many of you can imagine, that we are going with David to invite that community to work with us to build one of these extraordinary temples. They're good at building things there, and we're running a whole series of back-to-work programs for unemployed people, youth employment projects, because unemployment in Northern Ireland is very, very high. And the plan is that over a period of some months in the wet, windy, freezing cold spring of 2015, as unlike the Nevada desert as you could possibly get, but with the same idea of joy and delight, that community will come together to build one of these extraordinary structures, working with David and his crew who are coming from California. And that together, they will build an edifice which rises up high above the city and stands illuminated for a period of a week once it's finished. The temples in the Nevada desert are always used in this way for people to use them as a space for meditation, for reflection. And the walls of the temple, which are intricately carved, are hung with messages, as you can see here, to people, loved ones, to people who've passed away. The climax of the project in Burning Man, as I'm sure many of you know, is that the temple itself is then torched. And in Northern Ireland, in Derry, this has a huge kind of symbolism. We've already had questions about whether this is an incitement to religious hatred. The legislation around burning and the whole issues of those kind of tribal tensions are very strong. So last week I was in Derry and we launched Artichoke's very first Kickstarter campaign. We never do this because what we love to do is raise all the money, enormous amounts of money that it costs to do our projects, and then offer them as a gift to the community. But with this project, it's really important for us to demonstrate that community really want this thing to happen. So the plan is that however little money or volunteer effort or whatever people want to contribute, we're listening and we're ready to accept those gifts, that marker, that intention, that community has got to a point where it can bravely tackle the symbolic and extraordinary difficulties of the past by doing something which is extraordinarily positive and changes the landscape, temporarily changes the physical landscape, but forever changes the way that people feel about themselves and their joint enterprise. Thank you.